Hello everyone, and welcome to this Sensations English webinar for teachers. My name is Adam Scott and I'll be presenting today. We're running a little bit late due to some technical difficulties, but so let's get straight on with the webinar today. Thank you for joining us. So the first thing I want to say is that I'm a real fan of classroom research. I've been doing it for most of my career. I was very fortunate to be introduced to it on an action research program many years ago, and from there I've built up my own experience on it. So this is a lot coming from my own personal experience of doing classroom research over the last 10 or so years, and so if you've got any questions during the time, please feel free to put them into the Q&A box, which appears when you scroll your mouse to the bottom of the screen. And just so that you know, if somebody else has the same question as you, you can click the thumbs up button so that you don't have to type the question again, and the question will go higher up the list. But good day from Brighton, where it's just been snowing as well. So I hope it's warmer where you are, wherever you are in the world. Thinking about the overview of today's session, we're going to look at types of easy research, and we're going to see why that research is useful for us, how we can do personalised CPD, and why that will help us to improve our own practice and give us greater insights, and to be honest, make us more interested in the job that we're doing. And it's been a constant source of inspiration for me and interest for me, finding out more about how learners respond to what I'm doing in the classroom, how what I'm doing in the classroom impacts learning, and also how my presence in the classroom appears and can adapt and change. So all really useful personalised CPD. We're also going to look at how to do the research and a little bit of information on data gathering and approaches to that, and then finally some conclusions. The really important thing to say is that research can seem really scary, and the emphasis on easy research, honestly, this is something that isn't scientific test tubes and all of that kind of thing. It's something that's really something that you can just get used to doing as part of your practice. Let's have a look at a few reasons why. The benefits of classroom research. So it's the case of data versus intuition, really. We're already using a lot of intuition in what we do when we're teaching, but we don't often have the opportunity to qualify that or check that intuition, and classroom research allows us to do that by giving us data, because it allows us to focus our observations on a particular area and give it more attention than we would normally, and notice more things about it than we would normally. It also allows us to analyze and reflect on what's happening in our classrooms and in our teaching. So it gives us a great opportunity to find out more about and dig deeper into what we're doing in the classroom. The next thing on the next reason why that then helps us, it gives us a chance to qualify and to check the assumptions we already have, whether they're assumptions about a particular student, a particular activity, a particular approach to teaching. All of these things, we can have our own assumptions and sometimes even prejudices about, or unconscious biases about, which this data can call us to question and give us a deeper, more informed and more rational perspective on the different things that are happening in our classroom and to our learners. It also allows us to discover and develop our practice. So there's lots of ways that we can do that. We can develop our practice through courses, and we'll talk about other things in a minute, but this is a real way, a voyage of discovery for us, an adventure into what we are doing in the classroom, and that exploration in itself is enough to develop us. But when you've got a structure around it, such as classroom research, then that gives you much more well processed information and content that you can base your thoughts upon and evolve your thoughts and understanding and practice on. And finally, all of this goes together to enhance our intuitions so that we become more able to intuit what's happening in the class, because we've got a wider range of factors that we're aware of and able to comprehend when we see them in the classroom, things that otherwise we might not notice. And that's why I love this picture of a jigsaw puzzle at the back here, because when you're building a jigsaw puzzle, you have to go through that process of finding the edges and building up some kind of structure within which the other pieces make sense. And that's really what classroom research does for us. So that's why I'm so passionate about it. So to take us away from research for a second, to look at another context, to try and give you an insight into this, I'm taking an example from collocation, which is something that I've researched a lot, used lexical teaching in class and researched various things with that. But here on the left, you've got a picture of, I hope you can see, some plants. And I wonder what words would collocate with plant when you start thinking about what you might have to teach your students, or what they might be aware of, or things you can expect to come up in connection with plant. If you've got any ideas, just type them into the chat quickly. So what words might collocate with plant? You could think of verbs or nouns or adjectives. Oh, nice. Plant pot or house plant. Yeah. And loving it. Green fingers. Great. So let's have a look at the ideas I kind of jotted down. Typical things that you might find. House plant and pot plant. Yeah, didn't get green fingers. But what you'll see here is we're starting to build a lexical set rather than really talk about collocation. And I was stunned when I looked at the collocations for plant, the closest collocations for plant, or the most frequent ones, in the British National Corpus, because it revealed a lot which I had never considered before, and informed more widely how I approached vocabulary and lexical items in class. So these are the top 20 noun, plant plus noun, following on collocations from the British National Corpus. And the numbers on the right are their frequency within the corpus. So you can see there that a lot of these words actually relate to another meaning of plant entirely, which we need to be, I learned from that, I need to be making sure that students quite low level are aware of and can use. We've got plant machinery and plant equipment and plant hire and plant closures, which refer to either tools, big bits of tool or equipment, or factories, basically, and plant manager. So the students, if they aren't aware of this meaning of plant, they're going to misinterpret and try and understand what a plant manager is. So there's this area of collocation really drew out a lot of depth in vocabulary teaching, which I hadn't initially considered when I was dealing with vocabulary with learners. And here's the verb matches. Again, top 20 verb plus plant collocations within the British National Corpus. And so we've got improving the plant down at number 20. I'm pretty sure that relates to industrial work somehow, building a plant as well, making a plant. And so there's lots of things here that aren't related to what we might think of as the general meaning of a word. And that really expanded my idea of collocation beyond lexical set to other things. And without that piece of investigation, in this case into the corpus through a concordancer, I wouldn't have understood that. So in a similar way, in a parallel way, action research, classroom research, and other types of teacher-directed research are going to give us insights which really shake our world up in terms of how we teach and what we teach. That's why I'm so passionate about it. So there's 3 different types of easy research that I'd like to focus on here, and that's not the only types, but I think they're easy, achievable, and kind of good entry points to classroom research. So we've got video self-observation, supported experiments, and action research. So recording video self-observations, recording and watching yourself teaching with some kind of aim in mind. Supported experiments are short, single-step changes to your practice that you think about, do, and then reflect on. And then action research is short, 2-step investigations into practice, which are in a little bit more detail and go into a bit more kind of fundamental depth, I suppose. So looking at video self-observations, sorry, that should be an S, thinking about what they are. As I said, recording and watching yourself teaching. You're looking into a particular thing about what you do, or maybe how students react to this. The first time I did that, it was looking at how I use teacher talk in the classroom, but I actually learned a lot more from it besides, but that was my purpose. And so why I was doing it, to reflect on my presence, my actions, and my effect on learners. And how do you do it? First of all, you decide on your aim, and then you record a lesson and you watch it back and analyze it, and really remember to be kind to yourself, because there's nothing worse or more uncomfortable than watching yourself on video. It's like in the old days, they'd say hearing your own voice on a recording. Well, it's the same, if not a little bit more impactful. So just be kind to yourself and realize everyone feels like that when they watch themselves. There's nothing unusual about it. And then the last part of it is decide if or what you need to change. So if you need to change something, then think about that, decide on that, and focus on, in that case, what you need to change. Don't try and change everything. Try and make a single change, specific change, and that change could actually then become part of the focus of a supported experiment. So thinking about supported experiments, what are they? Short single-step changes to your practice. And the idea here is to find out about the effect of a single change in your classroom practice on your learners. One example would be how you collect learners' answers during feedback. If you always nominate, then you might want to try something else and explore how that changes the dynamic in the class. Or alternatively, if you always just accept the person who puts their hand up first or shouts out first, what effect does not doing that, taking some other process? I know some people have experimented with using mini whiteboards to collect learners' feedback. So the students hold up their whiteboard all at the same time, and seeing how that affects your understanding of the class, your awareness of what they're doing, and the students' engagement. So there's different things that you can think about there. So the purpose of it, it's, as I said, to explore something that you would like to improve on in your teaching. And first of all, decide on your focus, as before, gather ideas and decide what you will change. So talk with colleagues, or look at some reading or some blogs. Then use the new approach in class and collect data on its impact. So you think about data. We'll talk about data collection a little bit later, but think about what information you can get. And then afterwards, reflect on the experience and analyze that data and decide what you've learned. I've got the little image of the crystal ball here, because it's both kind of an insight into something you wouldn't normally have time and headspace within your class to notice and observe in adequate detail, but it's also very boundaried. It's very controlled as a situation, so it makes it very manageable. And you could do a supported experiment every month in your own teacher development, because they are quite limited. They can deal with a thing that's on your mind or something you're musing about, and it can really bring on your awareness of those situations, and most likely spur you on to want to do something a little bit more in depth, which would be a piece of action research. So what is action research? Well, it's a short two-step investigation into practice. And you're really then looking at an activity or a practice or a technique that you want to change through 2 cycles of research. And you can see the action research cycle diagram on the right-hand side, a very classic image there. Why are you doing it? First of all, it's looking at that procedure or activity or approach to see if it's effective. And then you want to, the second cycle allows you to refine this approach to find out what elements affect your learners more positively or negatively. So it's often the case that something is unexpected in the first cycle of research, and so then you adapt in response to that situation. So how do you do it? First of all, decide on your aim. And we'll talk about them a little bit later, how important that is. Deciding on your focus and then planning the process of your investigation. So thinking about who's going to be involved, what way you're going to do this, which classes you're going to use, what materials you're going to require, any other issues that you're going to face that you need to anticipate and overcome. In some ways, it's like a massive CELTA lesson plan. But the fun then comes when you get into the classroom and you use this new approach in your class and collect the data on its impact. And there's nothing quite as exciting in the supported experiments or the action research as seeing something you're trying in class being done by the learners and being creating a response which is slightly different to the normal response that you have to whatever approach you would normally use, and showing you things that you had never even thought would be an effect or an impact. So after that, then the key thing is to reflect and analyze the data, decide on any adjustment you need to make, and repeat the process of repeat the research in a second cycle. So we'll go into more depth in all of these in a minute, but I wanted to give you that overview of that's where we're kind of coming from. Then there's another big question though, which is why do personalised CPD? What's the point of it? So I've put up a couple of contrasts here. Now, all CPD probably is good CPD, but there's 2 different types: other directed and self-directed. Other directed, often high quality courses with set syllabuses. They have general relevance and you'll be going through and picking out what you find relevant about them, but they won't be tailored to you. The same is true of inset training, although that's often just one-off events rather than a coordinated series. And webinars such as this one, but that gives you the ability to choose because there's such a wide choice on the internet of different webinars from different places, and conferences, which if you can go to them are great events with a selection of sessions and the opportunity to network as well. They're getting more kind of personalized as we're going down that list. But what they don't give you the opportunity to do is put anything into action for yourself in that context. In general, courses might have some focus on that, but then they'd be applying some kind of research element to it. So if we move on to the self-directed CPD, first and kind of thing that we're all very used to is reading. There's a wide variety of journals and blogs out there where we can find out more about different elements of practice, but it is essentially, again, a passive activity where if we want to go and do something with that, there's not much guidance on how we might go about it in a structured way. We can go and take an activity and do it, but there's nothing about how we might structure what we might learn from it around it. Whereas then we've got video self-observations, which are really about your own experience and focused on your personal development, supported experiments, which are embedded in your classroom context, and you have free choice of the focus. And action research, which is that plus the opportunity to evolve that understanding through 2 cycles of research and more detailed collection of data and analysis. So thinking about directing your own development, classroom research, I love this picture of the kind of the library here. It's kind of, I know it's an old-fashioned notion of the mind that there's books on a shelf or whatever, but within all those different curving alleyways of thought, and the fact that it's not, you know, it's ours to stock with insights and information. And this is really a great way to do that. It allows us to focus on our own developmental needs and provides a lovely structure into which we can drop whatever interest we have. So it's something safe and something reliable that we can do with ideas for when things go right and when things are unexpected or go wrong. And it allows us to safely use our classrooms as a much more effective space for professional development rather than just professional practice. And finally, it addresses the emerging needs of our learners, because often what we want to find out about is why or how we can improve, why our learners aren't doing well at something, and how we can improve and help them to do better at it. So often that becomes the focus. So how to do the research then? Okay, we've got various stages, and I want to make it as simple and step by step as possible. So really, there are 8 stages, 7 or 8 stages. You have your idea, and then you read or think and discuss this idea, chat with colleagues, Google and find blogs and articles on the internet. I know things can be behind paywalls, but there's always something you can find, and Google is quite good at showing you bits of books, even if they're restricted. So it can give you an inkling and an insight into things. And ResearchGate is another good place where you can often find journal articles posted. So after you've done that kind of discussion, and other teachers often have recommendations as well and can share things with you, and you've had the opportunity to mull all of that, then get down to the focused planning. And this will make everything else super easy and simple and manageable. After you've done that, then you do the research, and then you analyze the data you've collected. Often this is the bit where people will kind of stop, give up. Oh, well, I found that out, or it didn't go right and I give it all up, or whatever. There's always useful data. You've made information, you've created knowledge through that data collection. So analyze that data, because it will help you in some way. And then that you'll see the arrow jumps across there. Conclude and share the information, concluding, deciding what you've learned from analyzing that data, and sharing it being really what distinguishes research from other activity, in that you, by sharing that information in some way with other people, it becomes research rather than just something you were doing in class or something you were doing for yourself. In the middle there, we've got adapt and repeat, and that's that extra cycle which exists in the action research model of classroom research. So that's a really simple step-by-step guide there. Before we move on to think about what you might do, does anyone have any ideas for anything that you might like to, any areas that you might like to think about in your own classroom practice? Anything you would want to investigate, find out about? Just type it into the chat now. I know we've got a very small group today. Oh, and you're going to see how your students use Sensations English. That's great. Yes, that's using new materials or using self-access materials. you can learn a lot then about what students are actually doing, which you couldn't otherwise. Balance of teacher and students' time in the class. Yes, so that's a great thing that we can use classroom research for, and all three of these different approaches you could do that in different ways. So moving on, going through step by step. Step one, the ideas stage, finding a topic. So thinking about what do I want to know and what do I want to improve and why is this important as well. So Anne and Fran, just the things you've written in the chat there, thinking then about why they're important. Why do you need to bother with this? Because this is extra activity for you to do on top of what you're doing in your classroom in the course of your work. So make sure it's got a good justification for it. Then after you've done that, the next thing to do is to move on to think about the read, think and discuss phase. There's always too much information out there. So do set yourself a kind of a limit on the amount of time that you're going to go off and research and gather ideas, but do go and look at journals or webinars, talk with colleagues, and think about reflecting on your past experience. And from all of that, then try to refine your idea to a focus. And again, talk to colleagues about this so that you can be sure that it's a manageable focus. It's not too big, because all of these approaches rely on taking a kind of a pinpoint approach to the analysis that you're doing, rather than trying to cover everything on that image there with all the different post-its. You're just focusing in on one idea, and that will make it manageable, which will mean that the research will succeed and it will be completed. Because if things are too big or too complex, then either they won't work in the classroom, or you won't have the time to keep going with it because it will be too involved. So the next thing then to think about is planning your research. First thing to do is to then finalize your question and make sure the process is small scale. The question will define that partly, and the activities you choose to investigate that question will define it as well. And plan each step in the process and how you're going to gather the data to. So we'll talk about the data a little bit later, but the different things that you can think about in planning each step is, what are the activities you'll be doing, or what are the techniques you'll be using? How will you be using them? Really, this goes back to the kind of CELTA lesson plan kind of thing, a detailed plan of what you're going to do so that you are very prepared, the materials are clear, the techniques are clear, and you know how long and what elements go into them. So planning each step. Then as you plan each step, you'll get a good idea about what data you can gather from that. For example, if you have got marks or something you can measure with the activities you're doing, then that's great data to try and gather, and you'll look at some kind of comparison, maybe before and after, or between particular elements that you're bringing in, or particular activities. If it's about your learners' responses, or the kind of quantity of kind of teacher talk, for example, or teacher support that's required, or something like that, or the different types of teacher support that's required, or the participation of the students, then that's other data that you need to gather, and think about how you can gather that. And then there's also the kind of opinions of you and your students, and the opinions from the experience of doing those things. So those are different kinds of data you need to think about how you're going to gather, because you can only plan that before you start your research, start doing your research, you need to capture the information at the time. It's almost impossible, and certainly very difficult and quite unreliable, to do something and then try and go back and capture the data from it. So just make sure that your data gathering is simple, and it's going to target only what you need to target, and that it's there and ready. And that could be questionnaires, it could be marks, it could be in interviews. We'll look at that a little bit later. But the other thing is to get permission, because research is using your students, using your classroom to do something more than, not other than, because it's all tied up with teaching, but to do something more than teaching. And that's what the students have agreed to enter the class for. So some schools have a policy which includes classroom research of some sort or other in the contract that the students sign. So if that's the case, then it's just a case of reminding students of that, and just explaining to them and asking them if it's still okay to do that. If not, then it's not a case of producing some great big formal document to say, I am doing this research and you will do this and you will do that. That's very much kind of overkill. It's really a case of helping students to understand that you are developing as a teacher. You want to be a better teacher, so that just like they want to be better students. And so you want to find out a little bit about something that you do in the class, and is that okay with them? And after explaining that to them, if you want to, or if you need to in that context, you can just get everyone to sign their name on a piece of paper, or you can even produce a small text that then each student signs or something. But that's, again, taking it maybe a little bit too far. So just something simple. I agree to participate in this activity as part of my class to help my teacher develop. And that is, not scary, but it is respecting the individuals in the classroom and ensuring that you've got permission for those things. So you should then have something that looks quite nice and simple, like the image on the right, just a few clear, organized steps that you can do, so that when you go into the actual doing of the research, your mind is focused on the activities that you're doing in the moment, and you're not having to think about anything else. So the next step is the doing of the research. So you run the activities that you've planned, and of course take it step by step. The image on the right here, I think, is really important, because at this point you're cradling knowledge in your hands. This, whatever you're doing, is actually generating some data, some understanding, some insights that you can apply. And so it's this bit that you really kind of, if you've done your planning well, then this bit just flows and goes like any other lesson that you've planned. Of course, with any new lesson or any new thing that you're doing, allow some time for issues with tasks which students might not understand, they might be unfamiliar with, or techniques, or any tech that you're using in this. For example, if you're collecting information by using a digital score gathering or something like that, and we'll mention that a little bit later as well, or anything like that, then think about that. And also keep notes of your experiences. So if you can, just for 5 minutes after you've finished that experience, whether it's doing the video observation of yourself, or the supported experiment, or a step in your action research process, make a note of your own reflections, some hot feedback, as soon as you can after the experience is finished, because that will be great. You won't remember that later on, so just take that minute to write it down. And I know we're all really busy with classes and things, but just plant yourself in a chair, do that little bit of writing, and then close the book and go on to the next thing you've got to do. And the second part is, of course, collecting the data, using your data gathering tools and keeping this information organized. I can't stress that enough. Have a folder with pieces of plastic pockets in it, and put the data in there straight away in the folder, so that it's there for you to analyze later. Because I know as a teacher, I've always got a big pile of paper or a load of different files on my computer, and trying to keep the research data together with that is just going to be the opportunity for it to get lost or become incomplete somehow. So just make sure you're collecting the data in an organized way. So moving on, then after that, you've finished your research activity, and then you need to analyze your data. First of all, you need to process it, make your data usable. So you've got to have focused on particular areas. Your data collection should focus on particular areas, but then after that, you want to look at particular themes. So for example, in a video observation, it might be the number of times you do a particular thing, or the number of times you use your voice, or the number of times or the ways in which you use gesture in the classroom, or it could be any of those things. But that video is going to have loads of other data in it as well, but you need to decide what you're going to focus on and collect that. And also, this idea of keeping a focus means it stays simple. Don't overcomplicate it. The easiest way to then process that data is to put it into some really simple Excel spreadsheet or other spreadsheet. And I know that research often involves algorithms or kind of formulas or something, but at this low scale, simple scale, you don't need to use any of those things. You can get by fine with talking about averages, because this research is about your class. It's not going to be generalizable to everyone in the world or education all over the world, as much as we might like it to. And even as we're doing the research, you may feel that, oh my God, this is a great insight that I've got, which everybody needs to know about. And that might be true in some general sense, but the research that you're doing is of specific relevance to your context, your learners, your teaching, their needs. And so it's overkill to start doing lots of complex statistics with the information that you get. So simple things like tables which collect information and give it a numerical value that then can be displayed in a graph or a chart. Because once you start looking at the graphs or charts, things become visible which weren't visible in the numbers themselves, because visual displays of information are just so much easier for us to understand and read into. So have a think about how you can display that data. If it's the number of times you use gesture, that would be one particular quantity, and then you could break that down into the different kinds of gesture that you use. So and you could categorize those according to different themes that you decide. So Anne's just said some of us prefer visuals to figures. Absolutely, yeah. So you can use using different visual displays or representations, whatever it is, that you can use. Something that is really outside of this, but Anne has just made me think of, is the kind of graphic representations that people like Emily Bryson are helping teachers to develop, which kind of are a way of summarizing things. And that is a great way, when we move on to the sharing stage, that's a great way of then representing what you've discovered. We do have to dig down into the data somehow, and for me that's through numbers usually, even if it's qualitative stuff like learners' experiences and stuff, you then break it down into positives or negatives or whatever, so that you can kind of see things as a whole. And then reflecting on this information, as I said, seeing things as a whole, what trends can you see and what was expected or surprising about that situation? And that is where you're really then moving towards your conclusions, except in action research, where at that point you would be adapting from those insights that you've got, the intervention in the classroom, the activities in the classroom that you did, identifying something you could improve, and then from that first cycle and deciding on a small change that might improve this, and adapting any data collection tools you need to cover this without making the data collection different from the first time. So you might need to add a tool or add a question to an existing tool so that you are still collecting the same information, so that that is comparable with the first cycle. Once you've done that, then you repeat the research, and it's important that you repeat the research elsewhere. If you did the same thing with the same students again, then that would be, it wouldn't be new to the students. It wouldn't be a valid enough research situation, because the students have already done the stuff and then you're coming back to them again. So the data is going to be slightly different, and it won't compare well with what you've already done. So there's two different ways that you can do this. The most typical is to have a different group that you do the action research with, and this is where action research is a bit more involved than the other research that we were talking about, easy research, because you might need to have another group and you might not have that group, or you might have to wait till the next year for that group. But the other way to do it is to take the same techniques but use it with a different subject focus. So you could leave it a few weeks, and the areas that you're working on in class have moved on, and maybe if you were working on the activities with a particular focus on a particular skill or something before, then you can shift the focus enough that the second cycle of research can happen without it being too affected by the first cycle of research. So and that might be the case, especially if you introduce a new activity to as part of your adaptation in the research cycle, then that would be helpful. You know, it would be distinct enough as well for your classroom context. So moving on from that, then you need to bring your conclusions together, and drawing your conclusions from your data, identifying what was useful for your practice and improving your practice, what you learned about your students from that, and what information has any wider relevance potentially. So all that data analysis that you've got, so what does it tell you? And this, whatever it is, this is the sign you've been looking for. It might not be the sign you expected, but it's certainly some new piece of understanding that will forever impact your own teaching practice. And then there's a question about how you apply these conclusions. Is this a major change to the way in which you teach? Is this something you will incorporate into all aspects of your lessons? Is it something about classroom management that can be, you know, a new bit of how you teach? Or is it something more nuanced, more specific that you're going to focus on in particular areas of supporting learners with a particular exam task type, for example, or a particular element of speaking skill development? So thinking about where and how this information, this knowledge you've created and generated, can fit into and improve your practice. And that's your CPD. There's one more thing though, sharing your own findings, and that's what turns this into research then. because research is shared findings, and you can do this in easy, informal ways. Talking to other teachers, either in your school or online, is a way of sharing your findings. And maybe you want to do something a bit more formal, presenting at a CPD session to colleagues, or writing a blog post. It doesn't have to be your blog. You can talk to someone who has a blog and say, oh, I've done this. Would it be possible to write a guest post on your blog? And normally people will be really happy for that to happen. If it's in an area of interest that they share, then they're really interested in growing that area of knowledge and that body of experience within that area of interest. So definitely, and that helps you reach out and connect with other people, and that's part of what research, one of the effects of research as well. So that would be more than enough, but you could also go further, and that's something that I've done, and it's one of my real kind of motivations, to be honest, when the research, if the research gets a little bit tiring, or if I get a lot of things on, and it's one of those extra things to help you keep motivated. I'm going to speak about this at a conference, and that in itself is maybe a second level challenge, but it's certainly something that you can take yourself to eventually, which is just thinking, well, I'm going to then take the time and effort to write this down into a talk for a conference, or even after that into a journal article, which is kind of, you'll either prefer speaking or writing. So I would go for whichever you prefer there. If conference speaking or speaking in front of people is terrifying, definitely start with the journal idea. And there's lots of little journals looking for input and things. If you've started with a blog post, then build up to journal writing, and the editors always give you a lot of support if you're new to writing. And speaking at a conference, if you're a new speaker at a conference, then there's often the opportunity to find a mentor through them, or someone, a colleague at work may have experience like that. And I know I was helped with writing proposals for conferences by a colleague at work who took a personal interest. And that's another way of helping to generate a collegiate atmosphere of CPD in your workplace as well. So lots of positives that come out of the research, which aren't just focused on what you've been looking at and analysing. So last thing then, data gathering. There are just got one slide on this really, because I didn't want to dwell on it too much. Lots of different types of data gathering. There's basically there's a division into two sets: quantitative, which is about numbers and facts somehow, and qualitative, which is stuff you can't really put into numbers, like ideas and opinions, but there is a way to numeralize them so that you can display them in graphs or something. So on the quantitative side, scores and grades, marks from tests or scores in activities, progression, changes to scores over time, and scientific measures. By this I mean stuff like the time taken to do something, or the quantity of something completed, how it might be relevant to your work. I did a piece of research into how pronunciation teaching improved reading speed or affected reading speed, and there's some great tests that I got from ISP Nation, who Paul Nation, who had developed these tests where you read as quickly as you can and then you answer the questions from the text, and so those were, and so the quantity completed and got correct questions and the speed of the reading were the measures, that scientific measures that I could take from that. On the other side of things, there's the qualitative. The quantitative can be quite difficult to organize and manage, lots of pieces of paper or whatever. And that's one of the good things about Sensations English, when you've got the teacher's toolkit, all the students' activities, the data is collected and you can just click a button and view it all. You can see what students have done over time or what a group has done on an activity. So that's really helpful and really takes the effort out of it. So if there's an element of Sensations English that's good for this, it's definitely the teacher's tools and the ability to track students' progress rather than having to make paper notes of all of that. So on the qualitative side of things, we've got closed questions in a questionnaire. These are the kind of agree, disagree, like, dislike kind of questions. And always, to make it easy to display them in graphs or whatever, have 1 as the worst and 5 as the best, which might seem counterintuitive, but then you can average, and you just need to divide the score and by the number of people who completed it, and you'll get a graph that represents good, like, overall quality or overall positivity in whatever the question is. There's also open questions. Really good to use a Google form to collect these answers if you're if it's a questionnaire, because then you don't have to type them all out in order to analyze them. You can copy and paste them into something to search them. Whether that's just a Word document that you can then use the search function to find keywords that you're looking for, or whether that, and you can certainly then highlight and annotate it and put notes on it or anything, or whether it's you want to put it into a simple concordancer like the Sketch Engine program, so that then you can analyze it on there, which is easy as well. It's quite fun to do, to search key terms and see what sentences come up really from people. And then it's really important with both these to avoid leading questions. If you're thinking of things like wanting to find out if a student liked an activity, rather than like, how much did you like this activity, which is pushing a student to make a positive assessment of that activity. There's a subtle pragmatic nudge there to try and get a positive answer. Writing something like, what did you think about this activity, is a much more neutral question, which isn't going to lead students. And the same is true then. You can do interviews and focus groups, which you should record so that you can then transcribe them, or now there's lots of good transcription software that you can get to do it automatically, and then you just need to check for where they've made mistakes. You know, like on the internet, you can find automatic subtitles for most things now, so that software's freely available online. But again, it's really important with these, because you're important as a person in these students' lives. You're able to influence them very much. So it's important to script your questions ahead of time and not deviate from them, and make sure they're not leading questions, so that you don't lead the students. So sentences like "tell me about" rather than "did you like" are really important to ways to ask the questions, and then to be quiet and listen and not be involved in what the students say in response, except to say maybe, "tell me more about that," or "can you explain what you mean," or you know, those kinds of things, to dig down into the data, or acquire more data, dig down into their ideas. And finally, the videos. So you can use them not just to observe yourself, but to observe class activity. And then when you're watching it back, you need to, again, set those particular themes to analyze or to study. So such as interaction between learners, or kind of time off task, it might be, if you're watching how students engage with an activity. So those videos are, again, a good thing to do, but that's a lot of watching that you're going to have to do. So it might be one of the things which is, don't try it the first time, build up to that. So that's the end of this, really. Just a reminder that Sensations English is great for lots of different ways of exploring your classroom through research because of the data tools that it has and the content that it has and the activities that there are ready to be used already. So that can save you a lot of time on those things. Just before we go on to the conclusions, has anyone had any more ideas about what they might like to research? A kind of has this given any kind of ideas for a piece of research that you could focus on? Okay, nothing at the moment, but you might just still be typing. So I'll move on to the conclusions and we can come back to them, and then there'll be a little time for questions. So the conclusions, basically, classroom research is something that makes sense of the issues you might have in your practice. And it gives teachers the opportunity to direct professional development in an easy way, which is totally manageable by the teacher themselves with whatever level of expertise they have got already. It doesn't require greater experts to do it. It uses small-scale achievable tasks, and it starts small and goes step by step. And so, and often, as I said earlier on, teachers will then be able to progress once they've built some of their research skills from doing the smallest activities to be more confident and do a bit more, but always making sure that the research is manageable. And it provides structured reflection through the data analysis. You get information that you are then encouraged, or which encourages you to think about why and how these things came about and what that means for your practice. And through all of this, because it's your thoughts which are being used to look at your data from the tasks you've set, it addresses your developmental needs. So you're at your learning edge, you're the edge of your practice that you're pushing forwards. And it helps you to develop simple data analysis tools, which you'll be using in research, but which inevitably then form part of your own practice, your own things that you do and things that you notice in your own classrooms all the time. So that's it from me. Just got a question. Any questions in the chat or in the Q&A box? I'll have a look at those. Yes, slides will be available afterwards, and the recording will go up tomorrow onto the website where the sign up page was. Fillmore has just said, just curious, would you still encourage research which performs error analysis of students' compositions or essays? So that's a really good question. I think I would certainly, it's really useful to know about students' errors, and that might be something that you then, once you learnt about that, the logical next step would be, well, what can I do to help learners with this as well? So I probably wouldn't, I'd probably do that research anonymously, so that I anonymize the students' compositions, and I might privately collect any demographic data that might be useful, such as first languages and where transfer might be involved and responsible for some of what we call errors. But you'd have to frame what you were talking about as errors as well, because there's different schools of thought. Is it an error that makes it incomprehensible, or is it an error that is outside of standard British English or standard American English, but which is still understandable? So that actually might be a good way of dividing that and deciding what you're going to focus on. Are they errors that are leading to a breakdown in communication, or are they differences from standard English but which don't lead to a breakdown in communication? And that would be a really interesting thing to study. I think the most important thing is always to deal with people and with their information with respect. The instrumental use of research, where you're finding out the answer for the sake of it without consideration of the participants, is is something I would never encourage, and research ethics would prevent you from doing if you were doing that at a university. But as long as you're working in a considerate and a compassionate way, which takes account of people's feelings, and for example, in this case, there's no reason you would ever need to know those students' names, then it's a great thing to research, because it's going to then inform something, lead on to, well, how do I help learners with these breakdowns in communication, for example, if you're looking at those errors, where do they come from? Can see asking a question about data gathering tools to improve the writing skills of my students who are finding it difficult to organize their thoughts. I thought of free writing techniques, but I would like something to guide me in implementing free writing activities. I'm just going to take a sip of water there. So I think there's two things there, and I can't see the name for this person, but thank you for your question. The data gathering, the tools you would use to gather data, I think there'd be things, first of all, questions about how the students felt about that free writing activity, or why students, what process students go through when they're trying to organize their thoughts. So think about some questions you can ask which kind of get into understanding the student's perspective, student's mind. You can sometimes do a kind of SWOT analysis of that, where you've got 4 quadrants: things that are easy, things that are difficult, things that are stressful, and things that are I can't think of, fun or something like that, that you can then you can get bits of information. It's a simple grid. Really, with data collection, the fewer words, the better, because there's less influence on the students. So that would be a good tool that you could use, as long like strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, but mixing it up, changing the words a little, so it's things that are easy and difficult, enjoy and stressful, or something like that. And then you'll get some great data out of that, which the students, because the students have got a space where they can put in whatever they like into those boxes, so you're not trying to constrain or channel their train of thought too much. And the other thing is then, in terms of using free writing techniques, you could then compare and contrast their opinions about that they've originally given with how do you feel about free writing, or using the same instrument, so you've got some comparison that you can do. Or you could also, in terms of finding out which elements of free writing that they enjoyed most, the idea of no structure, or the idea of no the time limit, or different elements of it, find out which elements they enjoyed most. Or then thinking about the outcomes from the free writing, what they can take from that writing for their work, or how that free writing then helps them to structure their ideas. Because it might be that you ask them to create a mind map of their ideas after the free writing, or something like that, and then see how then that allowed the students to create more structure, or if that, I'm putting an assumption there, but see if that allowed the students to then create more structured writing. Because in effect, what you're creating there is a nice pathway through lots of different micro skills in writing. And if the assumption would be, we'd have to find out through the research whether it worked, the assumption would be that taking those micro skills and breaking them down so that you're doing it really step by step, and I cannot emphasize enough, step by step is the key to almost everything. But yeah, if you do that process, then the assumption might be that once those steps are internalized, then they can be condensed into maybe a single step, such as a mind map. So that could be another step in your that research. That would definitely be an action research project, rather than a supported experiment, because it's got too many elements to it. But you could do little supported experiments, which are each of those micro steps. So that sounds really exciting and really interesting. I've just got a couple of other questions in the chat. And you're saying, my starting point for all things is the 6 W's. Once they get into the habit of doing this, they feel more confident. I'm not sure, I may be having a brain freeze. I'm not sure what the 6 W's are. Could you tell me? Could you share with us in the chat? Just while that's happening, just to say thank you very much for attending, everybody, and we will be back. Who? Okay, yes, completely. Anne's just said who, what, where, when, why, how. Yeah, I have exactly the same. And mine, I've just got the what, where, when, what, when, where, why, how, who is my order. But yes, absolutely, those are great, and they really, like, you can upgrade them to more academic language if you want, but the basic thing then is to take the fear out of them by downgrading them again to the what, where, when, why, how, who, and making that really part of what the students are deciding that they want to include. And that can be in narratives which are spoken or written, it can be in descriptions, it can be in the processes you're describing. Always remember, there's, in the IELTS exam, there's that curveball of the describing a process in part 1 of the writing, which doesn't always, it comes up less frequently than the graph analysis task, data analysis and table and data analysis task, but is there. And that's where these pieces of information for part 1 in the IELTS exam are really important to keep in mind. So it's even useful in those kinds of pieces of writing practice as well. And also says you also build on adjectives and adverbs with these 6 W's as well, and absolutely, that's building in those kinds of things for the more precision in writing, more nuance and more detail. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Next month we'll be back with another Sensations English webinar for teachers, and that will have an exam focus to it. But for now, thank you very much for joining us today. Remember that you can go onto the internet and find the Sensations English website, where we produce new news-based global learning resources for you to use in your classrooms. Every week there are 3 new resources, all published at 5 levels, complete with a range of practice and learning activities that go with them, and some study tools that work to improve your learners' speaking, writing, reading and listening. So they're always there with every new resource. Check out those stories. They're full of great grammar and vocabulary to use with your students, alongside loads of exciting ideas. So for now, that's it. Thank you very much for attending. Have a great day or night, wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you next time.